underbelly of trade in Africa is actually bigger probably than the official trade that there is. So what we need is a way to make that trade more formal, and therefore it needs to be attractive. One of the reasons trade isn't formal is because people don't want to pay taxes, but maybe also because if they want to get something across the border, there's a huge amounts of blockages. There's lots of paperwork and there's corruption and there's delays. So we need to have some kind of system which enables this informal cross-border trade to become formal. One of the big issues actually is that in Africa, if you want value-adding industries, they don't add value. So we had this problem in East Africa where there were refineries, oil refineries for many years, which eventually had to shut down. They just couldn't actually make the money. And so definitely the need for much better ports, much better railways, much better roads, that is essential. But also things like storage infrastructure. So we're talking about warehousing, but also things like cold storage, because there are so many things that are produced in this part of the world which are perishable. And something like 50% of Africa's crops perish before they get to market. There's just too many of them, they can't be stored properly. When they get to the port, they're stuck there for weeks in the burning sun. So absolutely, investment in infrastructure is critical, but we want to think cross-border. We don't want to build a lovely road right up to the border and stop there. We want to be thinking about cross-border value chains, where a truck arrives at the border, someone just scans a code and it's straight over, and it's making cross-border business a reality. Okay, I think, well, one of the most important is to make sure that there's proper incentives for informal traders to formalize. One of them is actually that you get to the point where you're making so much money, you're trying to push it around in a wheelbarrow, right? Okay. But I think this whole business of not overtaxing, of putting too many tariffs in. I think another thing is a heavy investment in the infrastructure, public infrastructure, roads, ports, railways, and also things like storage facilities as well. But then ultimately, I think, is to unleash the entrepreneurial spirit in Africa. There needs to be more money that gets to the SMEs and the MSMEs. There is an incredible entrepreneurial spirit here. We need to get the money to them and not necessarily to the big companies at the top. It's to a certain extent a speculation, right? So it does require entrepreneurs. It requires businessmen. You don't want a government going out there and betting $10 billion on something, right? But companies do this the entire time. Ultimately, the government's job is to make sure that you've got as fair as possible a trading environment, that you have good institutions supporting them, the infrastructure that we mentioned earlier as well.